Work?
Perfect.
Okay, cool. Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Jason Williams from Bloomberg. We also have Andy Davis here as well from SpeedCurve, who has also been working with me on this. And yeah, we're just going to sort of revisit this discussion on element timing. We discussed this back in early December. But yeah, I appreciate that not everyone was probably here back then, so I will probably just give a quick recap, go through the polyfill that we discussed in the last session we had, and then obviously we just open up for questions and just continue in discussion. So yeah, for those who won't be here before, we talked about how element timing only supports a sort of small subset of elements in its current state, and we weren't really happy about this, both developers and people who are here. More and more of the web is basically becoming component based, especially in how it's constructed, but also like even how people think about performance. They want to know when a widget or when a component or even a subsection of the DOM has been painted. So we had some discussions about this. But actually, even like composite elements like SVG, math, table, there might be others. They also have this problem, and currently they're not candidates for element timing. Actually, this problem also extends into largest contentful paint because that uses element timing internally. So the last time we met up, we sort of talked about how even in the Bloomberg terminal we have this problem where, yeah, even in this example here, you've got the title in the top right corner being selected. Our table component that we have at the bottom would not be a candidate for LTP because that makes use of element timing under the hood. So yeah, I mean, fundamentally, yeah, pages and apps are assembled from collections of elements. In modern web development, we often put things together as components, and that relies on using containers. And we want to be able to measure in that same way as well. So the end of the discussion we had last time, we decided, I think it might have been the idea of Yoav, for us to basically have some sort of prototype to work with and look at in user land to sort of help us navigate what would a developer want to see when timing various containers and components. The good thing about this is you can follow along with this. So there is a polyfill now. It's a work in progress. Mainly been working on it this week. There is the URL. It should take you to the page. And I will have to come out of the presentation in a second to show you. So it should look like this if you've opened a page up. Essentially, the polyfill does a couple of things. It will identify element timing elements. So this is like it will search for the element timing attribute on elements. It will check those elements are containers. I've been calling these container roots. I don't know if there's a better phrase for these. Basically, once it's found the container roots on the page, it will then attach element timing to all of the relevant child nodes inside. So as you can imagine, we sort of build up a tree of elements within each root. And then we can sort of sit back and let the performance observer fire for those elements then. It replaces the performance observer itself with this class. So people using this shouldn't have to use a new class. They can just continue to use performance observer. If they're not using element timing, it'll just be a pass-through. If it does pick up element timing events from elements inside the container, it will gather them up and then fire a new performance entry for that container. Sort of see that in the README here. Also, if changes happen within that container, then you get a performance entry for that container as well. Just wanted to highlight this. So this is the entry interface that you would get. So this should be familiar because you would get this with a normal element timing event. I've highlighted areas where this is different, or maybe it's just areas where it doesn't really, it's not really applicable to a container. So yeah, just going through these, we have, oh, sorry. We have entry type. So right now, this will show container element instead of just elements. That was just to differentiate between the two. There's no reason strictly why it has to be different, but developers might want to gate on whether something was a container or not for reporting purposes. So for now, the entry type is different. The start time, yeah, so due to the nature of entries that come out of this, this will emit multiple entries for a container as elements within that container do paint. So the start time here is essentially showing the first paint. So with normal element timing, you would just have a binary, it's either painted or it hasn't. The first paint event is essentially what the start time would be. Render time is the current render time. So if, for instance, you had two paint events, the render time would be the latest paint event. And last, painted subelement. This is just a reference to the last element that painted inside of this container. You'll see these in a second. Bit of an open question. Size, should we include size? So largest contentful paint has size. And yeah, if we were to include this, we'd probably need to call maybe get client bounding rect or some similar API that might trigger style and layout. How much of a problem that might be, we're not too sure. But yeah, at the end we can discuss this and maybe it's not too bad. Right, examples. So we need to come out of this. I assume you can still see my screen. So yeah, this is just the page when you come to the URL. So yeah, the first example is the table example. Basically, what we see here is once the container is painted, we get an entry. And then after 5 seconds, we update some cells and we receive a new entry.
I apologize, but can you make this larger, please?
Yeah, no problem. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, after 5 seconds in this example, we update the cells in column 2. And so column 2 was just empty divs in this example. We update it with some text and we receive a second entry. And you can see that there's some difference with the render time, for example. We see the time of the first render time in the first entry, and we can see that that's updated. Start time remains the same because that was just the first paint of this container. So the start time, once you get the first entry, the start time doesn't really change. And this may allow developers to sort of know times between each entry. And if they wanted to time the most recent render to the first, that's sort of the idea there that they can do. Yeah, you can also see we have less painted sub-elements. So we have a reference to the most recently painted in the first entry. And then we can see that in the second entry, we have the last painted element here. In reality, these are most likely batched. So all of these in column 2 probably painted at the same time, and they probably all have the same high resolution timestamp. This will just pick from the order that it receives, usually the last one. But in reality, they probably all painted at the same time. But you can see that we have a reference to what painted. Okay, so the second example is the adding content example, and This is very similar. The only difference here is instead of updating cells, we are adding a paragraph into the DOM. And I won't go through the entry properties, but you can see it's essentially the same idea. This works because the polyfill is using mutation observer, and we immediately add the element timing attribute to the incoming element. So in this case, the paragraph here, as soon as the paragraph is added, we add the element timing attribute to it. This will trigger the performance observer to fire a new entry. We take that entry, look at the element, and we see that it's inside of this root, and we attribute it back as a new entry. This performance observer is backwards compatible, so if someone did add element timing to something already, that would also show as its own event. So it should just continue to work as normal. Shadow DOM. This one's interesting. I did find this one really interesting. So Shadow DOM, the polyfill does not work, and I guess that's expected. It can't really receive events from within the shadow, anything below the shadow root. I did find it interesting that we do actually get a performance element timing event from the shadow root. And I guess this is being treated as a sort of single element right now. I know we're going to discuss this after this, but I know there's also been discussion on how we deal with Shadow DOM. But right now, I assume it's being treated as a single element, in the sense that it will only fire an event once, even if things within the Shadow DOM update. We may want to discuss that. But right now, the polyfill does not work to Shadow DOM. There's not really any currently easy way of that happening. Finally, SVG. It's the same, to be honest. I don't think it's possible for the polyfill to make this work. There isn't really anything for us to hook into to know when an SVG is finished painted or finished painting. You'll notice you don't get anything in DevTools for this example. Any solution here would probably need to be provided by the browser natively. That being said, I think there is an open question as well of whether SVG has the behavior of a singular element, like a paragraph right now, or an image, or whether it would have the behavior of a container element with multiple events if there's progressive rendering within the SVG. That's another open question that we can come to. But yeah, those are the examples. If I just come back into this, oh, let's get that out of the way. Right, okay. Yeah, I just want to touch on continued observation. So unlike with element timing, as I mentioned, element timing right now is binary, and you either get this is rendered or it hasn't. Container timing in this polyfill will emit entries multiple times for each new paint. The current flaw, I guess, with this implementation is it will continue to fire events long after interaction or the application has started up. If you imagine a carousel at the top of a page that has element timing on it, you might continue getting entries for each new image that's injected, especially if they're just moving one image from the left to the right. As we're focused on startup, this may not be useful. In largest contentful paint, we stop observing once there's been some interaction, such as a click or a key down. There could be potential scope for this, although it might make sense for now for element to just follow what element timing does, which it doesn't do this, and just continue to emit events. So again, another open question of, do we let the developer stop observing when they're happy to do so, or is this something that should be sort of built in? And yeah, that's sort of the question. Yeah, Shadow DOM, I think we touched on that. How should Shadow DOM behave? I know there was an open issue about this, but if we do have the concept of containers and multiple entries, then maybe Shadow DOM could fall into that category instead. We'll see. And yeah, there's plenty more questions around this. I won't go through all of them. Some of them have already been asked, but yeah, what's the feasibility of this being done in user land? Which is a question near the bottom. Seems pretty low. We have some limitations, especially around composite elements, around shadow DOM, around SVG, also animations. This polyfill hasn't touched on animations at all. I don't think it will be easy to do that, especially if you have content that starts off being 0 opacity and fades in. I'm not sure userland, a userland polyfill can pick up on that. So I'm not too sure of the feasibility of how far a polyfill can go. And yeah, will events on the showing the last painted subelement, is that enough? So this is the bottom point. Or will developers want information on how much of a container has been painted? So just as an example, if a container does have content in it that's painted, and we have a container element event that fires, but only a small section of that container painted, does the developer want to know more about how much is enough to say there's enough content here that I can class this as this container is ready? So yes, I think yeah. Thank you. I think there's quite a few questions there for discussion. But in terms of presentation and the polyfill, yeah, that is it.
Awesome. Thank you. I will stop recording and we can start.